So what specifically do you want to know about that?
Like your stance on it. It's the tax.
The estate tax is when
Like
somebody of a certain wealth level, when they pass away,
Yeah.
and they pass that money on to a relative,
Yeah.
how much of that can get taxed?
Yeah.
You know, honestly, I have mixed feelings about that. I think that particularly when we're looking at our farming industry and small businesses, you know, farmers, as I'm sure you know, can accumulate a lot of wealth, but they don't actually have it because it's in assets. And so when they hand down the farms to their family, it's not like a giant check. You know, you don't get $1 billion, you get all of these assets. I believe that you should be able to pass that stuff down. That's how our farming industry survives. And I don't think that the government should be coming in on any of that, to be honest with you. When it comes to giant chunks of billions of dollars, I do believe that we should be taxing on that. So for me personally, it would be about assets versus actual cash flow.
Really good question, thank you. Any other, yeah?
How's the state losing money if we're being taxed more?
Okay, so the being taxed more is a new change within probably about 3 weeks ago. So you were being under withheld, which meant you were getting more money in your paychecks up until, my time is like a giant bowl of mashed potatoes in the legislature. Every day is like 72 hours. The last change that happened was in February. So up until February, you were being under withheld. So there was more money in your weekly paychecks, but meant you would have owed more money come tax season. In February is when they made the last change for that. So that's a big part of why, because there is a huge delay when it comes to tax collection. But then also, as I said before, we're still trying to figure out how much of that comes from the tax cuts alone. So an average individual person, you would have been under withheld, now they're being over withheld. So we'll see a slight benefit to the revenue, so to speak, from that. But the real issue, in my opinion, is more of the tax cuts owed by corporations and those bigger chunks of money. Now, as tax season rolls through a close and folks start paying that money back, the expectation is that a big chunk of this $300 million will be made up in tax payments from people. But the real question is how much of that is going to be from Missouri citizens versus the corporation side. And that's where we get into more of the tax cut conversation. So we're honestly waiting to see how many bills are paid by Missourians to figure out where we are, which is not a good place to be, in my opinion.
What's your personal opinion on single-payer health care?
So I am someone who believes healthcare is a right. So I do want to see, in some form or fashion, a government-provided healthcare, whether that's Medicare for all, whether that is a single-payer option. I don't have a solution for that. I'm not at the federal level. I know it is so nuanced, and there are so many different. Nothing can happen overnight. Like, let's say that we elected someone who was like, yeah, we're going to do Medicare for all. That's going to take several years, if not more than a decade, to actually implement. But I do believe that healthcare is a right, and I think that everyone should have it, and no one should go bankrupt being sick. And I do believe that we end up spending way more money as a government because folks don't have adequate healthcare coverage on the backside, whether that is through bankruptcy or through payments and things that we're doing. So I'm eagerly watching the federal level to see which plan ends up making it through.
Are you in favor for the $15 minimum wage kind of being floated around?
I am. Minimum wage is something that is a difficult conversation because the reality is when you look at how much the cost of living is and regionally it changes, of course, depending, the city of St. Louis is going to be more expensive than living in Springfield, of course. But most economists will say that even $15 is not enough. But I also, my husband owns a small business. We employ about 30 people. And so I understand from the business side of things how difficult that can be. I think that the transition is going to be difficult, and there's going to be a lot of growing pains for both the business side as well as people. And I say that because there are a lot of separate policies that, say you're making $7.65 an hour and you're a single mom of 3, you will get daycare help from the government. And once the next bump up happens, provided that the Proposition B stays legal, that mom could potentially lose all of her daycare help. So she might get a $1 raise or whatever, I forget the tiers of it, then she'll lose this $400 subsidy. And that's problematic too, right? Because if you don't jump from $8 an hour to 15, then you're gonna be in a serious world of hurt if you're losing some of those subsidies as a single parent. So we need to enact some policies now that Proposition B has passed to make sure that we are protecting both the business owners and individuals, because this transition is gonna be hard. But I do ultimately think that folks who work 40 hours a week and are putting in the time should make enough money to live.
How is if like the cliff effect was to pass for childcare, how would that help out more than the system that we have now for childcare? Because like with those brackets, and then, like you said, like if you get a raise, sometimes your childcare like goes up, and then you can't afford your childcare. So how would like a new system help that?
Yeah. So this is a great example of coming in as a legislator and having this grand idea, and then the more I learn about what's currently there, we have changed this bill so many times. But I think we have a good solution now. What this bill does is it essentially would enact a sliding scale. So if you get a pay raise, then you jump down and you'll get a little less money from the state. Whereas now, if you get a pay raise, you will get cut off of everything. So what this does is allows parents who are getting that daycare subsidy to take that raise, to work those extra hours, and then just get a little bit less from the state, and then a little bit less from the state. And the hope is that they will become self-sufficient enough to not need that subsidy, but you're also not disincentivizing them for working more. And that's what's unfortunate, in my opinion, about our social service industry as a whole, especially in the state of Missouri, is we create a system where if you want to succeed, you can't. And I can't tell you how many doors I've knocked where people in my district are like, yeah, I took a pay raise and then I lost all of my services, so why work? And it's not that they don't want to work, it's that we have created a system that doesn't let them work. Because again, daycare, I've got a 4-year-old and I pay $175 a week for daycare. And if you're made to work in a single, a minimum wage job and you've got 2 or 3 kids, you cannot pay that. And so the state will come in with a subsidy, but again, if you take a raise, then you lose the entire subsidy. So why are we incentivizing anyone to work in that way? So what this program does is a pilot program that would just allow a sliding scale essentially, so that you make more money, you get a little bit less, and the hope is that we will, folks will be able to eventually get off the subsidy. And I do believe it will save the state money in the long run, because right now we have folks who stay on that subsidy for the whole 18 years that their kids are alive because they never get out of that income bracket. And a lot of times intentionally. I've had a lot of moms in particular tell me, like, I didn't take a pay raise because I couldn't afford to lose it. And that's just not the way that I think we should do that.
How much longer do we have before? I know you're off somewhere.
About 15 minutes.
Okay, let me ask a question before I throw it back to the floor. Missouri, I don't know if it's passed or if they're in the process of passing what's called a heartbeat bill, which would restrict abortions, ban abortions beyond 6 weeks. What is your general position on that issue?
So I voted no. I am a very vocally pro-choice candidate. And the big issue with this bill is there are no exceptions for rape or incest, which is very problematic. And I would say that most Missourians, based on polling and conversations, even if they are anti-choice and they're on the side of abortions, absolutely not, still believe exemptions for rape and incest are something that should be allowed. This bill, it does a whole lot of things. It's what we call an omnibus bill, so it was like 4 bills rolled together into one. It has passed the House. It is not moving in the Senate at all. But you'll see many states across the country are passing heartbeat legislation. Actually, a governor, I believe in Iowa, maybe Ohio
yeah.
yesterday signed it into law. So this is, I'm going to table that for a second, an epidemic happening across the country where folks write legislation and hand it to legislators so that the same bill is passed everywhere. We can talk about that in a second. But this is one of those bills that was written by an organization, provided to folks across the whole country. So ultimately, for me, as a woman, I believe in bodily autonomy. But as a social worker, healthcare, full comprehensive healthcare for women, I believe is a huge point of conversation when it comes to poverty and breaking the cycle of poverty. Women who don't have access to full comprehensive healthcare can often get trapped in a cycle of having children after children after children and never really escaping it. And that comes from someone who grew up in that situation. And my husband had his first child at 16. He grew up in a very small town with no access to healthcare. And so fundamentally, I'm very against that bill. And it barely passed. It was a very interesting vote for the House.
In addition to that, this is something else we talked about earlier this semester. We were fortunate enough to be visited by Representative Haar as well. We had a midterm election in November, and it was a really interesting statewide election because we elected lots of Republicans across the state. But then while we were electing a lot of Republicans across the state, we were also voting overwhelmingly for several voter initiatives, like the Clean Missouri, like legalizing marijuana, like expanding, like Kyle said a moment ago, minimum wage. We asked him to try to explain that. Can you try to explain that? Why are Missourians voting for Republicans in large and simultaneously voting for seemingly pro-democratic voter initiatives? I don't quite understand that. Maybe you can.
Yeah, so I mean, to be very honest with you, we're all trying to figure it out too. There's a lot of money being spent as to why. I have my own theories, and there's a whole lot of them, so I will try to keep it relatively short. One thing, a problem that we have in the state of Missouri, in my opinion, is the way that our legislative lines are drawn for districts. So as I said before, we have 163 districts. Out of 163, I kid you not, maybe 6 or 7 are competitive. What that means is all the other districts we know is going to go either Republican or Democrat. And you can tell that when you look at how we're spending our money and which races we're spending money on. So for instance, my first year, we were considered sort of competitive, and the other side spent about $200,000 against it. And in this last cycle, they spent maybe $15,000 because they're like, yeah, that's not competitive anymore. So when we're looking at a statewide conversation on districts, only about 6 or 7 are even possible to be flipped. So that said, if you have a region in Center City, St. Louis, where not a Republican even goes on the ballot, it's only Democrats. They don't even have general elections. If you're a Republican, living in that area, you're gonna vote for the Democrat because there's no other option. The same could be said for the 98 Republican seats that are guaranteed that don't have Democrats running there. So when you're looking at issues, folks may believe more on the Democratic side of these issues, but they don't even have an option. So that's one point. Second point, I think the Democrats have done a terrible job of talking about what we believe in and what we're working on in Jefferson City and across the country. For a very long time here, in my opinion, Democrats have said the Republicans are awful and we hate them. And they haven't really said this is what we care about and this is what we're working on. I mean, when I say that I believe myself to be fiscally responsible, fiscally conservative, people are like, what? You're a super Democrat. I'm like, yeah, but let me talk about the policies that are actually getting passed. And so we've done a very poor job in explaining who we are and what we believe in. So I do think that, over time, when you don't have other candidates to vote for, particularly Democrats, you don't have Democrats to vote for, there's nobody there spreading the message of what we do, then also our message is terrible because we're not really talking about what we're fighting for and the things we care about. That's a big part of it. Secondly, I think just overwhelmingly when it comes to issues, the country as a whole is moving more to progressive conversations when it comes to things like healthcare, wages, more social kind of issues. Now that doesn't mean that, obviously the Republicans have control, they have the presidency, but what it means to be a Democrat or Republican, I think, is shifting drastically right now. And if you look back through history of the political parties, you will see these big shifts in what each party believes in and who has control and whatnot. I mean, you go way back to the beginning of the country, there's no way I would have been a Democrat. So the political parties shift in ideology as well, and I believe that right now we are in this center of a shift.
Last question from me.
Okay.
Just for fun, we have a field of 15, 16 Democrats running for president right now. There are 1 or 2 that stands out that you'd like to say, take a look at this candidate?
Yeah. Oddly enough, Pete Buttigieg, who is a mayor.
Pete Buttigieg, the mayor?
The mayor, Mayor Pete, I think is awesome.
Okay.
I am, one who believes that you should have lots of experience before you govern, so that makes me a little nervous. Our previous governor is a great example of somebody who never did anything and jumped in. But I believe fundamentally right now in this country we have a very serious problem of partisanship, and it's getting really bad. And I can tell you in Missouri, for the first time in over 15 years, no Democrat amendment was accepted on the budget. For the first time since 2003, the minority leader hasn't had a bill referred to committee, which has not happened. And that's because the partisanship is so awful and disgusting right now. And I think that that's happening across the country. What I really like about Mayor Pete is he is calm and rational and seems to really want to collaborate. And I believe that collaboration and compromise has become a dirty word, and it shouldn't be. I think that government functions at its best when we're balanced, and we have, as I said before, everybody at the table and really creating good policy because everyone's perspective is important. And so that's one of the reasons I really like him.
Kenneth?
The Green New Deal. What's your ideas on
Expensive.
that?
Yeah.
93 trillion over 10 years?
Yeah, it's expensive. But it's one of those things too, I do believe if we are investing in renewables and moving in that direction, it will save us money. So sometimes investment does have to happen. But I honestly, I mean, the Green New Deal is simply a resolution. It's not even policy. So I hesitate to say I'm for or against something without an actual policy plan that I can read and say like this is what they're actually trying to do. So it's a resolution, and there are a lot of resolutions that go through the state of Missouri too that you may see I vote present on because I think resolutions are, I want policy. I want to actually have a conversation about it. What I do like about the Green New Deal is that it is forcing a conversation on where we are as a country, on our usage and what we're doing to the world. You know, when it comes to the environment, we are not doing nearly enough to, you know, to reduce our carbon footprint. And I think that we as a country are moving in the wrong direction. So I'm happy that we're having a dialogue at the federal level for seemingly like the first time, in my opinion, to really what we need to do.
Okay, on that note of renewable energy.
Mm-hmm.
So we have some renewable energy right now. We don't have like better ways to store it because solar panels are with lithium batteries. That's how they're storing the
Yeah.
energy. So should we focus more not on the more renewable energies, but the storage of them?
I think we need to be doing both. I would love to see more money invested in R&D when it comes to batteries. I mean, you look at on the private side, you know, there are some huge innovations happening right now in the private industry. And I believe in public-private partnerships, and I think that we as a government should be investing in some of that R&D so that, yeah, because you're totally right, we have to do better on our batteries. Where we're getting them from is actually causing more pollution than I think folks realize, where we're creating that. And so, yeah, I think that we need to be spending a lot more energy on that.
Representative, I don't know how much time you spent researching this. Is it your belief that windmills cause cancer?
I do not believe windmills
Okay.
cause cancer.
At this moment, I hate to cut you short. I know you got places to go. If any, I know other hands were shooting up. If they have questions for you, how do they reach you?
Yeah, so I am on every social media platform. I think, unless TikTok is a new thing, I haven't heard that yet. But I'm on Snapchat, Instagram, Facebook, Twitter. So you can message me on any of those. But I also, email is great. It's just crystal@crystalquade.com. So I am always around and always willing to sit down for coffee and talk through more policies or.
I personally vouch, as I've been talking to you and your folks all semester, super responsive. Most of your state reps, including Elijah, are super responsive. Please reach out if you have questions for your state rep. If you happen to live in the OTC area, you're looking at your state rep right now. Anything else you'd like to say before you?
Can I take one more question? Yeah.
So I'm personally really interested in politics, and one of my goals is to become a congressman at some point in my life. So what can I do right now to get involved in the political spectrum, and also what more can I do once I get out of school?
Yeah. So there is never an end to the volunteer opportunities that exist when it comes to the campaign side of things.
Yeah.
We always need help knocking doors, making phone calls. We need folks to bake cookies for us and just hang out in the office with us. So there's always a place to volunteer on the campaign side of things. And I can tell you from the Democratic side, we are campaigning 24/7 because we have about 1/10 of the money that the other side has. So we're always doing stuff there. So feel free to call and email me. When it comes to the policy side of things, there are a plethora of internships. You can come up to Jeff City and spend a day, 2 days with me. You know, those are really great opportunities, and I'm always taking interns. So that's how I got in, was an internship that then got me a job with the Senate, that then got me, you know, so internships are amazing if you have that opportunity to take one. I took out a whole student loan to go to Jeff City that I'm still paying for, but it was definitely worth it. And, you know, get involved in your central committee. So I don't know if you live here in Greene County, but each party has a central committee, which we can spend hours talking about the state infrastructure that's actually mandated by statutes, which by law, of how the political parties operate. Each county has a central committee, and they're always looking for members to join there, and what you do there is generally dictate the political platforms of the party and what they work on, which is super fun to be a part of. And then each state party has their own state party version of that too, so that's a really cool way to get involved. But I see your jacket, and you want to sit down and have coffee, we can.
Round of applause for our guest speaker. Thank you so much for being here. Thank you so much. Really appreciate it. Okay, Okay, so at this moment.